understand ourselves and the world around us through our bodies. And it can seem sometimes that we understand the world in our brains using language and symbolism, but we possess a body before we possess the capacity for symbolic thought and communication. We love and relate to one another before we possess this capacity. We learn, understand, and react to information before we possess the capacity for spoken language. Spoken language is the second form of communication we learn. And our bodies, our movement, is our native language, and arguably humanity's collective mother tongue. It is fundamentally important to us, whether or not we realize it. It is so important, in fact, that it's the bedrock for all other languages we learn. We speak about the world around us in movement metaphor. To grasp a concept means to be able to physically hold it. To shrug or to shake something off, to let it go, means to release a burden. To be stuck is to adhere, to get something off your chest, to take some breathing space. And this is all the case because our earliest experiences are not stored in the brain the way many of our current experiences are. They were stored in the body, and it can be very difficult to cast our minds back to a pre-verbal state. But you can get little glimpses of it in your day-to-day life. Anyone who has ever believed they've forgotten their PIN number until they raised their hand to the keypad and then found that movement memory had it there. Anyone who has lost their keys and retraced their steps and found themselves reaching out to where they put them because your body still remembers will understand that we have two entirely separate ways of organizing, storing, retrieving, and processing information about our world. One abstract and one embodied. And if we bring our awareness to this, and bring our awareness to ourselves and our communities, we can see that actually violence, oppression, and marginalization has a history of being inextricably linked to the physical body. Women's bodies, bodies of color, transgender bodies, fat bodies, disabled bodies, what we do with those bodies, how much of those bodies is seen, how much space they are allowed to occupy, and of course sex. If and how we are having it, who we are having it with, and if we are being paid or paying for it. For many of us, to know the history of ourselves and our communities is to know a history of body-based oppression and violence. Because if your body is the most basic way you experience the world, controlling your body controls the way you experience the world on the most basic of levels. And I'm sure we can all bring to mind examples of this in our lives, but I would like to share with you an example from mine. Like a great many white cisgender women, I went to ballet from a very, very young age. Like far fewer women, I continued for 14, 15 years along something of a professional trajectory. And during that time, some of the narratives I was told became more than just narratives, more than quips and things mentioned once or twice in class. They became internalized truths. Hunger was good. Tiredness was good. Pain was good. Not a warning sign, but a badge of honor, something to be sought and worked through. The body hair that I developed under my arms was bad. The curves that I developed were bad. The sweat that my body produced was unladylike, and it was my job to work to curb these unwanted physical outbursts. I found that unlearning my body's native language was not only tolerated, but encouraged. To conform, I deformed myself. What does that mean? To conform, to fit in. I deformed myself. I became separate from my body. And in doing so, I visited a great deal of violence upon myself. I became incredibly, incredibly unwell. I became physically and mentally unable to dance and unable to occupy these spaces, so I left them. Movement, dance was harmful, powerfully harmful to me. And it was only a great many years later that I realized that harmful is a modifier to powerful. And no power is inherently good or bad. And if the attention I was paying to my body to remain in these spaces had visited upon me such significant and lifelong damage, then could that attention also, in careful hands, be used to effect positive changes of equal magnitude? And the answer, of course, is yes. And what's more, you cannot fight a history of body-based marginalization and exclusion without involving the body. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about shape or size, gender or race, disability. If you want to control someone, control their body. And if you want to give someone permission to be authentically themselves, you have to extend that permission to the body. And I now work in two spaces where we extend that permission. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what they have in common and maybe what we can learn from them. So if you consider that the body has a language, has a movement memory, and has ways of making meaning, you might consider that it has a story to tell, or at least a part to play in the conversation. I'm a dance movement psychotherapist, which can evoke amusing ideas of communicating entirely through interpretive dance. And believe me, at several points today, I've considered not speaking and instead just dancing at you. But it actually means that I work with people using verbal and nonverbal forms of communication to explore emotions and anxieties. Sometimes I work one-to-one, sometimes in small group settings. And DMPs like me work in schools, hospitals, prisons, and in inpatient and outpatient clinical settings with a whole range of people. DMP can be particularly useful for those whose problems are inherently body-based, and for people whose problems are being enacted out upon the body. It can also be particularly useful for individuals with poor or no spoken language, a number of developmental delay, learning disorder, disability, and maybe even children. Now, like any psychotherapy, DMP is highly regulated. But the things that underpin it, this sense of having a conversation with your body, bringing it into the conversation, the idea that maybe by moving we can awaken new memories, or that by breaking some physical habit we can maybe help ourselves also break a psychological one, these are transferable. And this brings me to my second example, Irreverent Dance. Irreverent Dance is ostensibly just a dance school. We founded in 2012. We have over 800 active students, and we teach a wide range of dance styles. But what we pride ourselves on really is being accessible to people whose bodies may not be well accepted or well understood in the mainstream dance world. In order to do this, we think carefully about the language we use. We use gender-neutral language when we talk about groups body parts or clothing. We do not use ableist language, and whilst we are very fond of swearing, we try to use swear words that do not rely on sexism or bigotry. We think about our physical surroundings. Are they gender neutral? Are they welcoming? Are they accessible? We have no rules about clothing and jewelry. And in doing so, we like to think that we are opening up the possibilities for people to be themselves. We don't want you to look the same. We don't want you to feel uncomfortable. And we want to remove some of the marginalization based on gender, financial status, and body confidence that happen around clothing, as well as opening the door to wearable items which may relate to disability, religion, relationship type, or status. We bring consent back into the dance studio. If as a teacher I think that I want to make a hands-on correction to your positioning, I'm going to ask before I touch you. And of course, we think very carefully about our wider teaching style, bringing some of this theory from DMP. We try to teach our students to notice and listen to their own bodies, to get back in touch with that native language that my own dance experience tried so hard to separate me from. And we do all of this and far more than I can really explain today. So I went to my community, I went to the Irreverent Dance community, and I asked them, okay, so we do all this stuff, but which bits really matter? Which are the most important things? How do we distill this down to a few top tips on creating embodied, accessible spaces? And you will be unsurprised to hear that we couldn't. And I'll admit, it took me a little while to realize every person I spoke to valued something different. Everyone had a different most important thing. And that is the point. Every single consideration we make is important, but none of them can be the most important thing, because each of these things allows a different kind of body, a different kind of person, a different story, and a different history to enter into our space without conforming and without deforming. What we really do differently when we do all of these things is we integrate. We provide a space in which people, whole people, brains and bodies, can be authentically together. Together with each other, but also together with themselves. To connect with Irreverent Dance and the people in it, you do not need to disconnect from yourself. And for me, that was the missing point. That was key. And that is what we should take away into our other spaces, because the question is, where is the movement in your social movement, in your political movement? Where is the body in your body of work? And where is the political, is the social in your day-to-day dance? Where do you sit on the train? In your conference room? How do you move around your spaces, and how much space do you take up? What is your body communicating? And is it considered? Because we have these two fundamental languages with which we understand the world, and I cannot help but wonder, what would our lives look like, and what would our communities look like if we all just became a little more actively bilingual?